Hello everyone. In the last video, we went over how to get started with just installing Python and connecting to ETABS. In this video, I thought I would just do a crash course on Python and bring everybody up to speed on some of the basics. That way, you'll be less confused when I'm looking at the API documentation and we're going over that and starting to actually interact with ETABS. If you already know Python, then you feel free to skip this video and move on to the next one. But I thought it'd be nice just to do a quick rundown. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is console or command line prompt. So if you go to your Windows at the bottom and type in CMD, you'll get this little command prompt. And this scares a lot of people, but it's just basically a window in which you can type in code or run commands that your computer understands. So the one that we're going to type in is Python. And it's going to show Python 3.83. And so you should get something similar. If you don't get this, try just py by itself or py3. And if that doesn't work, then you probably don't have Python installed just yet. And try the first video again. And since I typed in Python, the Windows computer has now ran it. Oh, and also if it's another issue that you can have with installation is you haven't added Python to your path. So Windows doesn't understand what Python means. So then reinstall Python and this time add it to path. And it'll be like capital PATH. And once I've typed this in, I can go ahead and run Python code. So I could type in something like print hello, and then the computer executes that. And technically, you could write all of your code in here and it will execute. But this is not really an environment to develop code. This is nice to debug stuff and just check things. Where you really want to develop code is within something like an integrated developer environment like PyCharm. And here we're going to head and create a new Python file. We'll call this tutorial 2. And also, PyCharm does come with its own Python console and terminal, so you could type code in here as well. So I can type in Python there, and the same thing happens, and I could do print. And so it's the same thing as the command line interface in Windows. And we'll be writing our code up here. And so the first thing that I want to go over is data structures. Essentially, what data structures are containers for different types of information. I have a little list here of the different types. So essentially, you have integers, floats, which are numbers or decimals, strings, which are words, and strings means like a string of characters, bool, which is true and false statements, and it can't be anything else, just true or false. Lists, which is like a bunch of items in an array or vector, if you want to call it. Dictionaries and objects. There are other types of data structures in Python, but these are the ones that are most frequently dealt with. And if we come across other ones, we can deal with them at that point. So to start off with, an integer, like I said, is just a number. So if I have just the number 1 as a whole number, that would be an integer. But if I had 1.01, for example, or even 1.0, now that's a float. So it has decimal places. And how you would assign that to memory is you would create a variable name. And so that's just your container. So let's say I create a variable called number. I can put number = 1. And so now number is holding the value of 1. And if I do print number, and then come over to run tutorial 2, I get the value 1. It shows up here. If I change this to 1.0, or let's say 1.01, and hit run, I get 1.01. And also you can use a command or a function called type, which will tell you what type it is. So in this case, it's a float. And if I had a 1, it's going to be an integer. I can create something like a word, and you can type in anything between single quotes or double quotes. And you can also string together things in the print statement. So here, print, and then within the brackets, it's going to print out what type word is, and then the actual word. And so you'll see class string or str, and then hello. So if I create a Boolean statement, for example, as a variable, call it x is equal to true, and type in x here, x there. And so it says bool, and it's true. And it can be true or false. It can't be anything else. Then we can create things like lists. So word list. And you create that in square brackets. And in here you can put whatever you like, whether it's words or numbers. So for example, if I had something like word 1, word 2, word 3. And if I did print word list, it's going to print out the entire list. And this underscore here doesn't mean anything. It's a regular character. You could get rid of that. It's not doing anything. It's just a naming convention just to separate that out. And you could even mix different types. So you could even have like a number in here. That's perfectly okay. And you could also assign things to your word or to your list. So for example, index 0 is equal to new word. And if I print it again, I'll have my original one, my original list, and I'll have new word, and then word 2, and then 12. And if I use circular brackets or regular brackets, what's going to happen is it's going to throw an error. And because this is a tuple now, and with circular brackets, this is the concept of being immutable, where once it's created, it can't be changed. So this is good for storing data that you don't want to be manipulated or changed after the fact. Now we have dictionaries. You create those using curly brackets, and these have key value pairs. So for example, it would be something like word 1 is hello, and then word 2 is by. And then if you do print word dictionary, you'll get the whole dictionary. But the cool thing about this is you can reference things based on their key. So this is the key and that's the value. So if I type in word 2, it'll print by. So it goes into dictionary, it looks for word 2, and then it'll print it. The next topic that I want to discuss is something called objects. Next, data structure. These are a lot more complicated and quite tricky to understand at first if you're new to it. But essentially what a class is, or an object is, it's think of it as an object in the real world. So if you had a bicycle, it has different properties like an owner, a color, number of gears, number of wheels, things like that. And so you can create those in Python and in other programming languages. And the reason why you would want to is because it's a great way to organize your data. So you would want to create let's say a class. In this case, I'll do a bicycle, but in the future, you'll likely be doing something like creating a footing class or a beam class or an object, and you would store information about that beam, like the size of the beam, the geometry of the beam, its x and y coordinates, the size, if it's a concrete beam, what kind of concrete strength is it, the number of rebar in the top and bottom layers, things like that. And that makes it a lot easier. With an object, it makes it a lot easier to store that kind of information as opposed to creating really complicated lists and dictionaries and things like that. So how you create a class is you type in class, then like the name of it, and then you're going to do something called like define underscore underscore init, which just means initialize. And then the self keyword is kind of tricky, but basically it just means referring to itself. So you're talking about this object, but yeah. And so we're going to go ahead and create some initial properties. So for example, like owner, color, and let's say like number of gears. So number of gears. And how you would initialize them is you would say something like and so then what you would do is, for example, you could create a new bicycle. And so you would say something like new bicycle. And then you would use the bicycle class. And when you're creating it, you need to use open and close brackets and pass in these values here to initialize it. You can create a class without any initial parameters, and that's fine. And then you could create those parameters later on. So for example, for owner, I'm going to put in Canwar, and then color will be red, and the number of gears will be 6. And so if I do print new bicycle, what's going to happen is it's going to show that. So what's going to happen is it's going to show that there is a bicycle object located at this location in memory. And that's not very useful for us. So we actually want to, let's say, access the individual pieces of information here. So how you do that is you would say, or you'd put a dot and then color, and we could access the color. And then you could always change the items inside. So for example, I could do something like new bicycle dot color is equal to blue. And then if I reprint, before it was red and now it's blue. And so this is great for keeping like your data organized. Another thing that you can do within a class is create functions. So something like, I could do something like change gear, or let's actually make it gear up. And again, like it's creating that self because it's referencing its own information rather than information from a different class or a different instance of this class. So what this gear up function is going to do, it's going to increase the current gear by 1. So if we have self.current gear is equal to gear, something like that. So what it's going to do, it's going to take the current gear and it's going to add 1 to it. So it's going to equal add 1. And so now if we create a new bike is equal to bicycle, and then we pass in all of these parameters like this. So now that we've created our new bicycle object or an instance of the object, we'll go ahead and print the current gear. So it'd be new bicycle dot current gear. And notice we're printing the new bike. So it's this. We're not printing bicycle because bicycle is a class and it's the generic definition of it. It's not the instance of it. So you want to actually print new bike. And if we do that, we're going to get the value 2. And now if we run this function, but it's technically referred to as a method because it's a function that's part of a class, then we can change the gear, we can gear up. So we will do new bike dot gear up, and there's open and closed brackets because it's a function or it's a method. And then if I go ahead and print new bike again, type in current gear, we'll see it was 2 and then it became 3. And so that's basically objects in a nutshell. They can get, there's more to them, they can get complicated. You can inherit properties and pass on things. And but anyways, there's the basics of it and they're very useful. It's something that try your best to wrap your head around and understand. And if this was too quick, watch some other videos on YouTube, go look at some examples online. This is really important if you want to make good extensible code that you can share with people and something that's robust, because saving stuff into lists and arrays, it will get crazy real fast and your head will be spinning before you know it. So the next topic that I want to talk about is like logic or things like if-else statements and for loops and while loops. And so an if-else statement basically is if something meets a certain condition, it'll execute a code. And if it doesn't meet that, then it'll do something else. So for example, I can have something like number is equal to 10, and then have a statement like if number is greater than 5, print number greater than 5. So all this is doing is saying, I've created a number. If that number is greater than 5, then execute whatever falls in the lines below. Whatever's indented, it's going to execute that code. And you can essentially You can essentially create a whole bunch of different logic statements, like if-else statements. So we'll do that by creating a few more things like else number is negative. And so right now it's saying number is positive, but if I did something like -1, it should print number is negative. And you can also create multiple if statements by using the else if command. And so in this statement, again, the last one is being called. But if I change this to 0 and hit run, now it's saying number is 0. So the first one didn't catch it because technically 0 is not greater than 0. And else if, so it's basically an if statement, but it's another one that you're adding on. And then a double equal sign is equivalent to 0, which it is. Then I'll print this, and then it won't execute the code that's below it. It's only going to execute that one item, and then it's going to leave. It's going to go back to any code that you have on a line like over here, rather than anything that's indented. If it's indented, it's a part of this else statement. And if it's regular, then it's outside this whole if thing. And you can create if statements alone, and you can create an if and else statement. And you can also create if and else if statements, and you can have as many else if statements as you want. You can only have one if and only one else, but you can have as many else if ones as you want. Now let's get on to for and while loops. So basically a for loop and a while loop is something where it runs some code while something is true or for a given range. So it's good to, like, if you want to loop through something. And so if you had something like number list, and I put in some values, and then I can go and type something like for number in number list, print number. And so what this is going to do, it's going to loop through the entire list, and it will print off the numbers. And now you're probably wondering, where the heck did this number come from? I never assigned it or created it. And so basically, that's one of the beautiful things with Python is you don't have to pre-create or define your iterator. You can just make it on the fly. And how you should read this is basically it's for each number in number list, print number. And this number value can be anything. It doesn't have to sound or look like anything to do with this. Like, I could really change this to just like poop. And I can go ahead and do that. It doesn't matter. Python understands that you're iterating through whatever the heck you have up here. And it's just, this is the iterator, and it's going to go ahead and increase that index by 1 and just print off everything. So we can get into while loops. It's like while number is less than 5, print number. And in this case, for example, we'll actually have to create an iterator. Or an index, we'll call it. Index is equal to 0. And then we're going to increment that index. So index is equal to index plus 1. Oh, sorry, it should be number list. And then we're going to have our number list again. I accidentally deleted it. But number list, same thing. Just going to go put 1, 2, 3, 6. So now this should print oh, I don't want to print the whole thing. I just want to print the index or the value. So it starts off with index 0. So index 0 is a 1. And then so I printed off once, and then the index got incremented. So whatever it was 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. And it went ahead, and that condition was still true. So it went into number list. It put in the value 1. 1 is equal to 2 in this case. It's less than 5. So then it runs it again until you get to basically an index value of, in this case, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. When it got to index 4, which is a value 5, 5 is not less than 5. It's equal to, it's not less than. Then it did not execute the statement. And so then it was kicked out, and you move on to the next line of code. And for example, and one thing you can do is you can also just do like a shorthand. And so what this is saying is basically index and plus equal sign 1. So it automatically increments it by 1. If I print out the index, you can see what's happening. So, I'm just going to comment this out by putting a hashtag or a pound sign in front of it. So see, it's like index 0, 1, 2, 3. And then once it got to index 4, it was no longer true, and so it didn't execute this code. All right. And so the next topic that I want to talk about is functions. We kind of already covered them with the whole method thing, but maybe I should talk about this first. But essentially what a function is it allows you to create something like basically a math function that you've seen in school, or you took math, where like f of x is equal to y. And so, yeah, f of x is equal to y. Yeah. So you'd pass in an argument, and then it would give you an output. And the reason why you do this is because you'll want to package up your code, and you can call these functions and make use of them. And then you can deploy them wherever you need or wherever you want. And so, for example, if I had something like number is equal to 10, and I define a function using def, define, and then I'll create a function. I can call it whatever I want. And I'll call it square number. And you'll put an open and closed brackets and with a colon at the end. And inside of it, you can pass in arguments. So you could pass in anything. Like you could call this whatever you want. I could put in x, for example. And then I'm going to return essentially x times x, or you could do x to the power of 2, which double asterisk is to the power of. And actually, I'm going to delete this up here. And how you call this function is you can say something like square number, and then see it's asking me for an input. So I can put in x is equal to number, and that number is equal to 10. And I'm going to just print this entire statement. And so it gives me 100. And you don't have to put in this x equal to number. It's just if you want to be explicit about it, but you could just pass it in. And Python knows that the first value that you put in is the first argument, and the second one, and so on and so forth. And so if you define something like this on its own, it's considered a function. But if this was part of a class or an object, then that's considered a method. And so the next item that I want to talk about is importing libraries. And so this is one of the most powerful things in Python or any programming language is you can import things created by other people. You're basically using other people's stuff. And so think of it like a library. And if you import something, you're basically taking a book off the shelf and stealing or using whatever code that they have that they're allowing you to use. So in this scenario, we're going to import the math library, and you can access it by typing in a keyword math and then putting dot. And now you can go through all of these different functions that somebody else has already written. Like you got a square root, a ceiling, a cosine function, you got a sine function, tan functions, you name it, someone's done it. There's lots of different libraries out on the web. There's plotting libraries, you have all of MATLAB that you can use through Matplotlib. So there's lots of different things out there, for deep learning, AI, whatever. And you're going to be importing like the com types library, for example, and that allows you to communicate with ETABS. And so we'll just use the square root one, and you can see that it requires one variable x. And so we're going to put in number to redefine number. Again, I keep deleting it. And if I run this code, nothing's going to happen because something did happen, you just can't see it. So you have to put a print statement around it, or what we can do is I can create a new variable, number sqrt is equal to that. And then what I'm going to do is I'll print that. And now you'll see that's the square root of 10. And you can also create your own libraries and import them from different, basically, modules. So if I created another Python file, and I'll call this new library, I guess lib, doesn't matter what you call it. And let's say I created a function like the math one that I had before. So define square, and you pass in x, and it returns x to the power of 2. And if I go to this one here, I can type in import new library, and then I can go ahead and make use of that value, or of that function. So I created a function called square, and I can pass in number, and you'll see that it's highlighted red. So it's going to give me an error. It says it's not defined because I don't have that function basically access to it, or I haven't given a path for Python to find it. And normally, like when I had it within this file, it could find it because it knew it was there. But since this is another one, I'll have to type in something like from new lib import square. And now it knows, like, go to new lib, then import square. You could also use an asterisk that imports everything that's in this, but that's not recommended to use asterisks. You can run into issues where if you have libraries with similar names and stuff like that. So if I type in square, and it does the same thing. And if you don't type that in, like the actual function itself, so if I do import new lib, you could always go to new lib dot square. So basically, it's saying go to new lib, then find this function. But this is just a little bit messier to write, but then you kind of know where it's coming from as well. So that's pros and cons of how you want to do it. And so the next topic that I wanted to cover is user input. And the reason why is because you can create some basic console applications that will take your input or your colleague's input, and it will execute code rather than having to go into the actual Python file and change variables or parameters. And then so it allows for a lot cleaner execution, and you don't have people messing around with your source code. So how you go about doing that is using this function called input, and inside of it, goes a prompt, and that prompt can be any kind of string. So for example, we can say enter username. It can be whatever you want. We're just going to say enter username as an example. And this will execute, but you want to assign the prompt to a variable. So let's say we have a variable that's called username, and I'm calling it string username or str username. That way we know that we're dealing with a string, but you don't have to do that. That's just good convention. And then if we do print username, we can see what we type in. And so at the bottom, you can see here, it's prompting us. And I'll go ahead and type in a username. I'm just making it up, Canwar. And then it's going to go ahead and print that value. And so you can see with this, it's a very powerful functionality. You could have it where it prompts you for different functionality. Like if you want to send data to ETABS, you want to extract data from ETABS, if you want to deal with certain combinations or certain frames or shell elements, whatever that you want, you can begin to create a nice basic console. So that wraps up the kind of crash course in Python. I covered everything very quickly and briefly. The goal was not to give you a full lesson. That'd be impossible in 20, 30 minutes. It was more so to either jog your memory or give you a touch off point where you could go Google that topic and learn a little bit more about it, or watch some other YouTube videos. And I can link some of those YouTube videos in the description below. And so you can kind of dig deeper into this. And there's so much that you could do, and there's so much to learn. Even I don't know maybe 10% of Python. And I've been doing this for many years now. But I hope this helps. And in the next video, we're actually going to start now dealing more with ETABS, how to read the documentation, and how to write some nice plugins and code and all that kind of stuff. And we'll also try to focus on best practices, because really anybody can write some basic code that communicates to ETABS. It's not that hard, but writing something that's clean, efficient, so you can share it, you can reuse it. That's really where the value is. A simple few lines of code that does a basic thing, that's fine, it's great, it's a good start. But you'll be hard pressed to reuse, like a spaghetti string type of code for one project after another, especially if you're at a company and you're using this for your work, and you develop code for one project, and then if you want to develop code for another project, you don't want to have to rewrite everything. You want to write nice, clean code that's modular and that you could use for the next project. And that way, you're way more efficient with your time, and you're way more efficient with just your energy, and you're not running into all these debug issues and all that kind of stuff, and saving yourself a headache. So that's everything for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll hopefully try to get the next video up soon.